자, 이제부터 시작하겠습니다. Now we begin the second day of this conference, Breaking the Impasse to Advance Peace on a Korea Peninsula. 힘찬 박수로 맞이해 주시기 바랍니다. Again, my name is Wonjun, and I'm a lay theologian and will moderate only session 1 of today. Before we begin, I'm to inform you that Korean bishops are coming now to join us, and they will arrive roughly 100 minutes later. But it is not the delay of time, it is scheduled. Yesterday was a wonderful day. We have reviewed the critical issues concerning North Korea and heard not only the government's position on that issues, but also South Korean Catholic Church's effort to promote the dialogue with North Korean Church. Today, we will go deeper on the themes how do we overcome the limit. Now, we will begin this conference by viewing the video together, Solutions to the North Korea Issues in the Eyes of a Japanese Politician by Nakagawa.
Greetings and my warmest regards to you all. To begin, allow me to express my heartfelt appreciation for the invitation to participate in this precious meeting. I'm proud to be a part of this latest gathering, convened in pursuit of bringing peace to the Korean Peninsula. Unfortunately, with the Japanese Diet currently in session, I'm required to remain in Japan for attendance. Thus, it is necessary for me to join you through this video hookup model. I naturally look forward to the rectory meeting with all of you sometimes in the near future. I'm proud to say that I worked with the legislators from both the United States and the Republic of Korea in originally launching the IPCNKR, the International Parliamentarian Coalition for North Korean Refugees and Human Rights. For many years, we have advanced our cause by strongly denouncing human rights violations committed by the regime of Kim Jong-un. This stance includes keen collaboration between the United States, the ROK, and Japan to strengthen our respective legislation addressing human rights in North Korea. Such efforts have taken the form of laws that serve as the basis for sanctions against Pyongyang. The tragedy in North Korea is rooted in extreme levels of governance by terror and manipulation of information by the military. This has effectively brainwashed the general population together with other appalling human rights violations. Another consequence is continuation of the Kim regime. During this time, the international community has seen North Korea directly exposed to numerous dire threats to its very survival. For example, the collapse of the Soviet Union, upon which Pyongyang so heavily depended for its existence, cut off economic support from Moscow. Another factor has been unseasonable weather, further contributing to economic chaos and food emergencies. North Koreans have experienced tragic conditions leading to widespread death from famine. Over 300,000 North Koreans, meanwhile, have fled the nation to China and other destinations. It was from around that time that the international community began to feel that the Kim regime was in danger of collapse. These struggles were reflected in the North's approach to diplomatic negotiations. At one time, it appeared feasible to hold the so-called six-party talks on the North's nuclear weapon programs. Soon after that, however, Kim Jong-un crushed the faction of his government which favored opening up the country to the outside world. He effectively rebuilt his policies of terror scheme, voicing the intent to firmly promote nuclear and missile development to audiences both inside and outside the country. Today, it is clear that Pyongyang possesses nuclear weapons. Being steadily advanced, meanwhile, is development of long-range missiles to carry such bombs. The international community, and particularly the United States and the ROK, have used two processes to confront this trend. The first is economic sanctions. The second involves working through United Nations resolutions and application of other pressures, searching for means to hold the North's nuclear and missile development programs. China, within its own independent policies, has also sought to exercise controls over the Kim regime. However, under the impact of the situation in Ukraine, along with other distractions, world opinion has failed to define effective diplomatic courses for dealing with North Korea. Instead, only a prevailing sense of crisis appears to be expanding. This has raised concerns of a steady shift away from diplomacy in favor of conventional policy platform military deterrence. Within Japan, in reflection of U.S. intentions, there is growing awareness of China. This includes the introduction of domestic missile defense capacity, notably introduction of the ability to attack enemy bases, nuclear sharing, increase in defense spending. With regard to Pyongyang, I fear that excessive emphasis is being placed on military containment. Limiting our focus to such thinking will fail to resolve the true challenges at hand. Indeed, I believe the time is right to return to the true origins of the North Korean challenge and revisit the potential for effective diplomatic strategies. Viewed from the essence of the North Korean issue, we can say that Kim Jong-un deals with the U.S. with the aim of ensuring that both his power and his regime remain in place. Moreover, to surmount the grave problems facing his nation, he has little choice than to create enemies on the outside, distract his people's attention from the true issues, and shut out incoming information. This is a key to provoking sense of crisis and using that mentality to govern. I propose that we return to these two basic points and engineer a shift in our diplomatic policy toward the North. This needs to include moves to control the Kim regime through military force while simultaneously mobilizing effective diplomatic means to advance our goals. My own personal North Korean strategy, conceived as another option for progress, consists of the following three core points. Number one, the United States agrees to ensure continuation of the Kim Jong-un regime. In return for the ultimate lifting of economic sanctions, North Korea is urged to open its doors to the international community. Following that, collaboration with China is used to persuade Pyongyang to abandon its nuclear weapons. Number two, implement humanitarian aid from international agencies, the ROK, Japan, and other sources. For the distribution of such assistance, find means of direct access to the North Korean people, avoiding military routing. Number three, propose acceptance of North Korean citizens as migrant labor in Western industrialized nations and other markets. Encourage greater human exchanges and flows of information with the West. Under the current political structure of the ROK, each change in the government brings new policies on whether to recognize the Kim Jong-un regime. The key focus of the Kim regime is the US, more so the ROK. Thus, this underscores the need for Washington to express its intent to ensure the existence of that regime. Means must be discovered, furthermore, to convince the North that such a pledge is trustworthy. With this as the starting point, the democratization process within North Korea can only be realized by awakening the general population there. Toward that end as well, we must define diplomatic policies capable of providing access to the outside and opening up the North to other nations. In that sense, I'm deeply troubled by the expanded sense of hegemony on the part of superpowers and the quest for means of changing the status quo through military might. This trend is not limited to superpowers. There is an emerging tendency among intermediate states, for example, to be incited by the emerging conditions. This is being seen in moves to mobilize domestic opinion to concentrate power in government hands, expand military might, and advance other moves. Against the backdrop of the shift towards such global militarization, it is vital to act in calm and collected fashion, forging another alliance for collaboration. It is my sincere hope that this symposium proves effectively in guiding our hearts and molding our ideas, thereby assisting us in the vital quest to realize a stable and lasting peace. This concludes my talk. Well, thank you so much for your kind attention.
예, 나카가와 의원님 감사드립니다. 자, we have wonderful 4 speakers today. 본격적으로 이제 시작하겠습니다. And we have still same basic rule that every speaker will make a 15 minutes presentation. Our first speaker of today is Professor Kim Sung-kyung. She is the professor of the University of North Korean Studies in Seoul, Korea. She has published many articles in diverse journals and one of the most experts on the theme. She will deliver the speech on North Korea society at a crossroad, change and continuity in a Kim Jong-un era. 박수로 맞아주시기 바랍니다.
Okay, thank you so much. And I prepared my presentation in English, so I will do the sorry about all the Korean audiences in here. Today, I'm going to just bring into some of the features of North Korean society. I mean, we've been talking about international relations and how to build peace in yesterday, but I think it's time to get to know about what's really going on in North Korean society. So the title of my presentation is North Korean Society at a Crossroad and Change and Continuity in the Kim Jong-un Era. So it's basically what I want to say that is the current change of North Korean society is somewhat kind of linked to the different strategies of Kim Jong-un tried to deliver to the people. And that different strategies perhaps is very well related the current changes of North Korean society. Especially I'm really interested in this, the impact of marketization in North Korean society. So let me start with, it's not working. Can you just, okay, next slide. Is it working? No? Okay. Let me start with the just basic concept. I mean, I'm interested in the emotion and affect and politics. And as we know, that is the recent political trend in many countries have sparked an interest in the relationship between emotions and politics. And the politics is manipulating a certain feelings and hatred and also joy and happiness. And so it's like using the emotion to govern nation and using the emotion to control the people. Not only just my argument is there are lots of people is looking at this affective side of the politics, and it's become more and more noticeable. And my argument is that North Korean regime and perhaps the containing very much the populistic features and operationalize the emotions such as fears, anger, joy, and sadness in very effective way. And I believe that this North Korean reader have very, so keen to construct in their own way of presenting the strong identification with the people. The next point I just want to make it that is kind of interestingly, I've done some of the research with the North Korean defector in South Korea, and I've been doing this interview for last 10 years, and they all have a very good image of the Kim Il-sung. But this Kim Jong-il is such a sort of the time of despair, and it's almost hopeless and painful, and perhaps it's because of his very brutal operation of the military first policy, and then the Kim Jong-il actually gained the power just after the economic famine in 1994. So it might be reflect a certain image of the leader. But because of the arduous march during the 2000, there has been a huge sort of widespread of market in North Korean society, and it's almost like mushroomed in the market in everywhere. It's not only just number of the market issues, but this market and market system has become very much embedded in the people's mindset and also everyday lives. And we all know that the Hazel Smith argued that from 2010, the North Korea has gone through the process of the marketization without the liberalization. So in this crucial moment, the new and young figure of Kim Jong-un became the leader of the DPRK, and many North Koreans held very high expectation of this new leader, anticipating that he would put into the very effective economic reform. And this genuine hope is perhaps closely related to the leader's personal background, such as like he's very young and Western educated, and he is supposed to has a very strong desire for winning. But the rest of the world has a doubt, right? Because he's just too young, inexperienced, unqualified. But what he did, just after gaining his power, he launched the very massive scale of the construction project. And we all know that it's a Yeomyung Street construction project. And he just managed in I think in the 13 months to complete in the whole street to the newly built and the modern buildings and the new facility, the leisure facilities, and so on and so forth. And also, he managed to put in so many different kind of cultural aspects in his power. Like, for example, the Raisho mark in the 25th anniversary of the ruling Labour Party happened in the 2021 and 2020. And these are kind of completely new phenomenon for the North Korean society because they all have just military march and it's a very sort of strict control. But, you know, Kim Jong-un is kind of opened the space for the North Korean people to express and their consumeristic aspirations and their cultural aspirations as well. And even Kim Jong-un has launched a new ideology called the civilizations, prosperous country ideologies. So civilized socialist nation. So, you know, this is a time in North Korea. It's not just behind the rest of the world. And we're going to make the civilization, we're going to make in the, you know, the same level of the lifestyle as any other country in the world. And I think they really respond to North Korea's expectations. I think he went to the, you know, the Hwanghae-do in 2020, just after the pandemic. He went to there and showing that, you know, to the people that is, I do care about you. And because in those people just suffer from the very heavy floods, so they lost their house and they lost their crops. So he went there, he drove by himself, like, you know, almost constructing this image of the very young and passionate and, you know, very, you know, have a kind of the ability to deal with the issues. And in Nodong Shinmun in May 21st in 2021, he launched this ideology of the spirits of love for the people in Wimin Hanshin, and also Emin Jongshins as well in Korean. So why is that? You know, I know that he managed to make it a lot of sort of military sort of exercise and, you know, launch the missile and the nuclear tests. But at the same time, he do care about the society, care about the social bits and cultural bits. So we all know that this North Korean society being really changed and also is now even changing. The market, the number of market. You know, in official data in 2018 is at least the 436 market in nationwide, but in the 2019 is estimated to reach the 900 market in the nationwide. So you know, the market is everywhere, and the people rely on their everyday life in the market. But in the 2000 in around that area, just after the economic famine, the market is remained as a very basic level. You just go there to bring whatever you have and just exchange with the food or monies and very basic level. But from 2010, as I mentioned, I would say that they reached the second stage of the marketizations. And now the market is everywhere. And then it's also combined with the political power. We call it as the patronage economy. I mean, you could find a lot in the traditional economy in other places in the world. So it's almost that the middle class bourgeoisie, they have this very close link and very closely kind of cooperations with the North Korean politicians and North Korean, you know, the people from the WPK, so that they make the money and also they operate the industries. So I think one of the good example is the construction site. You know, Samjiyeon City Construction Project is one of the good example because in Kim Jong-un announced a couple of names of Donju in Nodong Shinmun and appreciating their effort. So it's showing that Donju became a part of official construction projects. So Donju bring in some of the big cement or glasses or money, and they contribute to some of the huge amount of the construction project, and then later they make money and they make the profit. So now the North Korean economy has become very hybridized form of economy between the socialist planned economy and market-oriented one. Of course, the way of life is being changed as well. We know that this is the mobile phone, although it's very restricted. I mean, internet is not allowed in North Korea, but they do have an intranet. They share the informations, and if we calculate the mobile phone in the borderland between the China and North Korea, the number of mobile mobile phone users is even gone up. And it's really part of their economic activities and their everyday lives. And also high level of mobilities with the increased use of diverse form of the transport. Yeah, I'm just going, yeah. And also the stretch of the informations and financial network, because the people using mobile phone to transfer and wiring money to the other part of the North Korea. And this consumeristic desire and market-minded behavior, and people want to have the better product. They want to enjoy the leisure life, and they want to spend like $100 in every evening to enjoy their, the night out. And this kind of culture is now become part of this middle class in their everyday life and culture. So I think it's a whole this situation really pressurized in Kim Jong-un regime to introduce more liberal policies. And also, I suspect that the reason why the Kim Jong-un became, this talk with the U.S. and even the Moon administration in the 2018 is this internal pressure. We don't really talk about this internal pressure within this domestic pressure, but my argument is we have to look at this domestic pressure. Then this marketization, there are two main agencies. The first one is, of course, women, because women is the only group is allowed to work in the market. And then, of course, youth. And youth has very rebellious attitude and different kind of way of thinking. And also they brought up from the market. And but because of the pandemic, and then the pandemic happened just after the Hanoi No Deal, so I'm afraid this Kim Jong-un is kind of going back to the old way of controlling in North Korean society. For example, in 2020, in August, the regime introduced a new emergency quarantine law, and that kind of law is so good at controlling the domestic people. And also the December 2020, the regime enacted the law on rejecting the reactionary ideology and culture in order to prevent the capitalist behavior and thought among the people. So the pandemic could be taken as a state of exceptions, whereby the political power militarized in society in the name of epidemic preventions. Agamben argued in the earlier stage of the pandemic. And since after the Hanoi No Deal, for Kim Jong-un's understanding and Kim Jong-un's regime, it's such a good opportunity to recover, his authorities and his controlling the society. So it's the COVID-19 pandemic for the North Korean society and people is as a kind of state of exceptions. And there were a couple of major events happened in the 2021, and it held the Labour Party Socialist Youth League Congress in 26th in April, and the Socialist Women's Union of the Korea Congress in the 21st and 22nd June 2021. So, this is like a mass mobilization is coming back. And especially, this Women's Union Congress, it was really painful to see that it's like this whole women's issue is going back to the past. He's really asking those Korean women to give a more child and also, educate the younger generation with a more stronger Juche ideologies and socialist ideologies. So the possible path in the post-COVID era, and of course the economic situation getting worse and worse, but now it's kind of sustaining, according to the expert in North Korean economy. And the border is repeatedly closed and open. I just read in newspaper article that is they open again, getting some sort of, the product from the China. But it is also directly impacted to the smuggling business as well as the market activities. But still, lots of huge production, huge construction project is going on. So it's more labor burden, labor work for the adult and even women and the youth. They were really forced to be part of huge production, huge construction project. I don't have much time, so I can't really go in depth in every single point, but I just want to move to the next, my final point. I start with the emotions, right? I start with the emotions. And I'm so interested, so how come is Kim Jong-un, showed in his very kind of weak kind of characteristics to the people? I think that this very legendary speech happened in the 2020, the 75th anniversary of the ruling Workers' Party. He gave this uncharacteristic speech, which he apologized the current hardship facing the North Korean, and even cry and shed the tears. So, it's really facilitating kind of emotion to the people. And then, showing the people that is really to care, but he can't really control, because now he's saying that we are suffer from the triple disaster, sanctions, pandemic, and the flood, and lots of natural disasters. So it's like really showing this human kind of aspects of his face to the people, so that really bind the North Korean people as a one communities. And then the 2020, I think he's doing exactly the same thing. The Kim Jong-un photo just after the 8th Party Congress in January in the 2020. And because of that incident, actually the pandemic is spread in North Korea, officially said. So, this type of kind of photo, this image is so new, you can't really find it during the Kim Jong-il time, because the soldier is really holding Kim Jong-un's arm, and they are almost like sitting side by side and really almost embracing one another. So this is the image he tried to bring in. And also the later, in even Kim Jong-un's wife in research is crying, and people are all crying. So my argument is, the Kim Jong-un is now having a lot of trouble. So he's facilitating a certain emotion in order to grip the control over the people. And so it's almost constructing this, the huge community of fears and huge community of the sadness. And you can perhaps imagine in this kind of military parade, like people are all crying. And they are having this very kind of common feelings. This effect is really impacting to the other peoples, and it has a certain meaning and power. So we need to look at what's really going on, within the North Korean society, and what kind of emotions and feelings and sentiment they are sharing in this particular moment, a very difficult time for the North Korean regime. Okay, I'll finish my presentation here. Thank you so much.
예, 감사합니다. It's an informative and wonderful speech. 김성경 교수님은 언제나 교회를 잘 도와주셔서 다시 한번 특별히 감사를 드리고 싶습니다. And now the second speaker is Professor Andrew Young, who is a very appropriate speaker to talk to us about U.S. perspective on Korean Peninsula, obstacles, challenges, and next steps. Professor Andrew Young is a senior fellow and a SK Korea Foundation chair in Korea Studies at Brooklyn Institute's Center for the East Asia Policy Studies. And he is a professor of politics at the Catholic University of America, where we are. 바로 이 대학의 교수님이십니다. 자, 앤드류 교수님 박수로 맞이하셔야겠습니다.
Hi, good afternoon, and thank you for that warm introduction. And I am at the Brookings Institution, but this is also my university, so I would like to welcome you here. I want to thank the USCCB and also the Korea Catholic Institute of Northeast Asia Peace for inviting me here. And it's a little strange looking out, because usually I use this room to give exams. I used to give comprehensive exams to about 90 to 100 students, and now I'm looking at a group of people who are interested and care about North Korea. So it's definitely a change in an environment. And as an academic or a professor, I have done quite a bit of research on North Korea, not so much on the nuclear situation or on the security issues, but my research has mostly been about people-to-people exchanges or human rights. My last book was on marketization and state, society, and markets in North Korea. And so I'd much rather be giving the talk that Professor Kim just gave, because as an academic, that's more interesting. But I think I was invited here in part because of my new post at Brookings, where I think about these policy issues all the time. And as you've probably guessed, when you think about US foreign policy, what's in the minds of US policymakers is often what's in the news cycle. And so it's very strange to be asked, so tomorrow I'm going to be talking at Brookings, we have an internal retreat, and they asked me to talk at a breakout session where they have other challenges. So it's strange to see North Korea as an other issue when 3 or 4 years ago, when we had these summit meetings between Kim Jong-un and President Trump, and between Moon Jae-in and Kim Jong-un, that was a major issue. But such is the nature of US foreign policy. And so that does make addressing the North Korea issue a big challenge for the US government. So I'm going to really just do make two broad points in my talk. And the first is really to really unpack the skepticism that exists among US policymakers. I think you already know that the Biden administration is quite skeptical about North Korea. And then the second part of my talk, I want to just emphasize that we need some new kind of framework. I don't have the answer to what that new framework is, but maybe that's something that we can discuss in the breakout session. And actually, Frank my good friend Frank, we were in a meeting yesterday with a senior official from the National Intelligence Council, and I think the same themes kind of came up there, where we're really stuck, but we're also stuck in coming up with a new idea. So maybe that's one thing we can explore together as a group. So in terms of the skepticism in the US, I've just broken it down into four reasons. And this is skepticism after the Hanoi summit in 2019. And there was one other meeting, I think a lot of people don't remember, but after the Hanoi summit, the special representative to North Korea for the US, Steve Biegun, and his team met the North Koreans in Stockholm, Sweden in October 2019. And they thought that maybe they could resume the dialogue from Hanoi, but I just remember that the meeting ended, people were angry. I think the US delegation left after 4 hours because it went nowhere. And there has been no high-level dialogue since that point. So the first reason is for the US skepticism is simply that North Korea has not responded at all to US overtures and requests for dialogue. I know that Mr. Scott Walker from the State Department was here yesterday, and he may have already told you this, but as you know, the US has an offer to the North Koreans to meet them anytime, anywhere, with no preconditions. And I do think the US is sincere about that, that they're willing to talk to the North Koreans, but the North Koreans have not responded. And it's not just about dialogue on the nuclear issue. Even discussions about humanitarian exchanges, or about, there's ongoing issues about POW remains, American prisoner of war, and remains that are in North Korea. So there's no dialogue on that. In terms of COVID-19 vaccines, the US government did offer, there was a plan to offer medical aid and assistance and even COVID-19 vaccines to North Korea, but North Koreans didn't want to accept those. And so from the US position, they feel that, well, we've already reached out, the door is open, but North Korea is not coming. So that's one issue. The second issue, as you're well aware, is the COVID-19 pandemic lockdown, so the self-imposed lockdown that the North Koreans have put up themselves. And so the first 2 years of the pandemic, so 2020, 2021, the assumption was that no dialogue is going to happen until the pandemic ends. So we're waiting to ride out the pandemic. But I think things have eased. So North Korea went through, they had a spike in cases, and they referred to them as fever cases because they don't have the equipment to actually test, sufficient equipment to test whether it's COVID. But they did have a spike in cases in May. But even as this pandemic lockdown continues, there's some that argue that Kim Jong-un regime is actually taking advantage of the pandemic lockdown, that he's centralized his authority. So Professor Kim Sung-kyung talked about the markets, and so markets were growing, and it's hard to say that they were flourishing, but certainly there were some changes that were made that allowed individual North Koreans to make money in markets. But at the 8th Party Congress, so earlier this year, Kim Jong-un talked about centralizing economic authority. So we see that the regime is trying to reassert authority over the economy, clamp down on markets, and there's also much tighter political control. So you've probably heard that human rights groups tries to bring in outside information into North Korea. Frank and I heard this yesterday about is Kim Jong-un more scared of the South Korean army or the BTS army? And it's hands down is the BTS army. But now there are these new laws that were passed that make it much stricter. The punishment is more severe if you're caught with outside information or Korean dramas or music. If you're caught watching those, the punishment is more strict, it's more severe. So some have argued that the pandemic lockdown is a good way for the regime to reset its authority. So again, that's a reason for skepticism of why North Korea is not coming out of its shell. The third reason is just looking at the missile tests. So last night, there was another missile test from North Korea. It's the 5th test in the last 9 days. It's the 23rd series of tests in 2022. North Korea is on a record pace for missile tests. And of course, there was the intermediate range missile that was fired over Japan. Japan was very upset about that. And so looking at North Korea's testing, from the vantage point of you as policymakers, clearly Kim Jong-un is trying to send a different message, and that's not one of dialogue. So that's the third reason for skepticism. And then the last reason is just global events, what I mentioned earlier, that the Ukraine issue is really the biggest focus of the Biden administration. That and then US-China competition. Even at Brookings, and Brookings Institution has pretty close ties to the Biden administration just because many of our fellows went into the NSC and into the State Department. I just hear from them, it's really either about Russia or China. It's this return of great power politics, and North Korea really does not factor. I think the Biden administration just prays that they don't do a nuclear test or they don't do anything drastic to change the situation because Russia and China are really taking up much of the energies of the Biden administration. And just a side anecdote, I've taught a class at Catholic University called Asian Security since 2008, and there was 1 week where I talked about flashpoints in Asia. So it was Taiwan and North Korea. And in 2011, I stopped talking about Taiwan because I thought the issue was not as pertinent. And I just focused on North Korea. But I taught the class in the spring, and I reintroduced Taiwan again because that's what everyone is thinking about. And I've even heard policymakers. So you probably know the Koreans here know National Assemblyman Tae Young-ho. He was the highest level North Korean defector since Hwang Chung-yap, and he was in D.C. And I thought he wanted to talk to me about North Korean human rights, and he came to talk about Taiwan. He thinks the North Korea and Taiwan issue are linked, and I was wondering, does he want to link the issues because he thinks that that's going to get the attention of American policymakers because we care about Taiwan, and so bring in North Korea? I'm not suggesting that that's what his thinking was, but it was just interesting that even he wanted to talk about Taiwan, not North Korea. So a lot of skepticism within the Biden administration and within the US. And of course, that makes it very difficult to have any kind of dialogue. So that gets to our point about needing a new framework. And so something that we discussed yesterday in our meeting with this senior official at the National Intelligence Council was that there's coming a point where at least the officials that deal with North Korea at the government level, they are, it's the same hands. They've been dealing with North Korea for the last 20 years, and there isn't really any new blood or younger people coming up that have experience dealing with North Koreans. And even in terms of contact, 10, 15 years ago, there was a lot of, I wouldn't say a lot, but there was at least some exchange at the people-to-people level, where whether it's humanitarian aid or development assistance, whether it was businesses or taekwondo groups of scientists working on forestry or agriculture, there was exchanges, and all of that has stopped for the last 4 or 5 years. And so our American knowledge of North Korea is really atrophying, meaning that there's no human contact, and so we're trying to understand North Korea without any direct interaction or engagement, and so that's really problematic. So in terms of, and I know I only have 3 minutes left, but in terms of thinking outside the box, so 2 things. One is on the nuclear front, and I know that this has been proposed a few times, and I know Frank has also talked about this as well, but there was a period, I think, during the Moon government where, at least in the US, there was some discussion about arms control. Now, what's the difference between arms control and denuclearization? Arms control was seen as a way of making an intermediate step towards denuclearization, because it's clear that North Korea does not want to give up its nuclear weapons. And so I felt that what North Korea wants is some kind of tacit some acknowledgement that North Korea is a nuclear state. Now, there's a lot of risks in saying that, well, we can concentrate on a freeze, arms control, but the point is to stabilize the situation. I think the US policy now, for lack of a better term, is, again, strategic patience, or I guess a longer way of saying is we're not sure what to do because nothing else works, but that's too long, so let's just call it strategic patience. But time is really on North Korea's side, because if you really do nothing, North Korea is just going to continue to test and continue to expand its nuclear capabilities. And I'm curious, because I know the US CCB and I know the Catholic Church has a position on nuclear weapons and on non-proliferation, but would it be acceptable for North Korea to be a nuclear state? So I was curious to hear, especially from the bishops, what reactions there are. Because from the peace perspective, the idea is if you want peace and engagement, it's better to at least have some kind of arms control agreement in place, and then to go from there and to normalize relations, or to begin to engage North Korea once again. But can you do that if, let's say, North Korea ends up having good relations with the US, but they still end up having their nuclear weapons? And their country, I can give you examples, India, Israel. So what would the position of the church be? Because I think we're trying to move towards a nuclear-free society, and certainly that would not be the case. So that's the big dilemma. The second is on the engagement part. And this is, you can talk about it at the government level, but also at the societal level. And I know the Korean president, President Yoon Suk-yeol, has laid out the audacious plan, which is really just lots of investment and aid for North Korea. But that also is going to go nowhere, because that's not attractive to the North Koreans. They don't want South Korean money or investments. They want to be recognized as a nuclear state, and they talk about security guarantees. So there has to be something in addition to that, in addition to the investment in the aid. So it's the investment aid plus alpha, plus something else. So what is that plus? Is it, and I think I know what it is for North Koreans. They want things like stopping joint military exercises with the United States, or the removal of or reduction of US troops, but these are going to be non-starters for the US. But in terms of engagement, and I'm going to steal from Frank, because Frank had asked yesterday about, in terms of engagement, the US policy has been to not issue any visa. There's a travel ban, or there's just a ban in general for US citizens going to North Korea. And sorry to steal your point, Frank, but his idea was that it shouldn't be, it's one thing if North Koreans are preventing travel and engagement, but it shouldn't be coming from the US side, that we shouldn't be banning the travel. And I know that there's reasons for it, because there have been high-profile cases of Americans being detained, and so there are risks there, but But do the benefits meaning that you'll still have, in a post-COVID period, maybe a few hundred Americans being able to go into North Korea doing humanitarian work or people-to-people engagement, who may follow the rules and maybe they'll be okay. Is that worth that's the benefit? Is it worth the risk of having someone, a U.S. citizen, detained? So again, we're really stuck on ideas, but we do know that the current frameworks, the current ideas out there have not worked, and so I think because of that, we haven't really decided to put forward anything. The Biden administration, the U.S., they're not putting any new ideas forward as well, too. It's not for a lack of trying. I do think that the North Korea experts in the U.S. government they have tried to reach out at different moments in time, but we're just at a very difficult situation right now. So I'll stop there and look forward to the discussion section. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Yo, for the wonderful speech. Your points will surely help us to understand the U.S. perspective, new frame, and situation deeper. The third speech will be held by Dr. Frank who will say about the overcoming obstacles to peace on the Korean Peninsula. Dr. Frank is a senior expert in Northeast Asia at the U.S. Institute of the Peace. He oversees the Institute's work on Northeast Asia and focuses on ways to strengthen diplomacy to reduce the tensions and enhances peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula. Dr. Frank 박수로 맞이해 주십시오.
Hi, everyone. Very good to be here. I want to thank the Catholic Institute for Northeast Asia Peace and the Catholic Korea Peace Forum for giving me an opportunity to participate and share my thoughts. I will focus my remarks on addressing the obstacles to peace on the Korean Peninsula, and then offer some recommendations for how we can overcome some of these obstacles. So I think the biggest hurdle to peace is not the lack of ideas, but it's rather a lack of political will based on fear and mistrust. Pope Francis, in his 2020 World Peace Day message, said, quote, "The world is paradoxically marked by a perverse dichotomy that tries to defend and ensure stability and peace through a false sense of security sustained by a mentality of fear and mistrust. And this poisons relationships between people and obstructs any form of dialogue." So to put it simply, the two countries, North Korea and the United States, fear and do not trust each other, and this is undermining their ability to build peace. And it's easy to understand why North Korea feels this way. It's a small, weak, insecure, impoverished country that's in direct conflict with the world's superpower. It also has the experience of being devastated by over 600,000 tons of bombs, US bombs during the Korean War, and also living under the threat of nuclear weapons after the US violated the Armistice Agreement in 1958 by deploying nuclear weapons to South Korea. And then on the other hand, in Washington, there's North Korea fatigue. And this fatigue is based on the perception that North Korea is a bad actor, it is deceitful, it doesn't keep its promises, and it isn't interested in denuclearizing. So given this situation, there's a conventional thinking among the establishment in D.C., which includes the Biden administration, which is that we can't solve the North Korea problem. And because we can't solve it, the only thing we can do is manage it, right? We need to keep North Korea in a box. We need to strengthen military deterrence. We have to isolate it, and we have to increase pressure through economic sanctions. I think this approach is fine if you only want to achieve the limited goal of preventing war, which we have succeeded at for the last 70 years. But while this goal is a necessary goal, it is not a sufficient goal, right? There are other important goals. Things like improving relations, building peace with North Korea, tangibly reducing tensions, halting and reversing the arms race in the Northeast Asian region, enhancing communications and understanding of North Korea, strengthening the welfare and human rights of North Korean citizens, and then, of course, denuclearizing North Korea. And I think, you know, if we're aiming for these broader goals, then the policy tools of diplomatic isolation and military pressure are not effective, and they're not sufficient. And we have 30 years of empirical evidence that supports this conclusion. When we isolate and pressure North Korea, as we did during the first part of the Bush administration, or most of the Obama administration, or all of the Biden administration, North Korea does not respond well. In fact, pressure seems to accelerate North Korea's development of their own deterrence capabilities. When we look at the decisions by President Biden and President Yoon Suk-yeol to, and this is this year, to expand the scale and scope of exercises and resume the deployment of U.S. strategic assets to the Korean Peninsula, to me it seems identical to the decision by Presidents Obama and Park Geun-hye in 2013 to respond to North Korea's, at the time, third nuclear test and satellite launch with enhanced deterrence measures. And how did North Korea respond to these enhanced deterrence measures back then, between after 2013, right? It responded with the greatest advances in North Korea's nuclear weapons program, including 3 nuclear tests and over 90 ballistic missile tests. So I'm very pessimistic about seeing positive things from North Korea over the next few years. And then on the other hand, when we engage with North Korea, the evidence shows that North Korea tends to behave better. Not perfect, but better. During the 8 years of the agreed framework period, 1994 to 2002, North Korea conducted 1 missile test, the one that overflew Japan in 1998, and did not reprocess any plutonium. In 2011, during the negotiations for the Leap Day deal, or in 2018, in the negotiations that led up to the Singapore summit, there was no weapons testing. There is a 2017 study by Lisa Collins at the Center for Strategic and International Studies that confirms this pattern. When we engage with North Korea, it tends to behave better. So we know what works, right? The big question that we've all been grappling with is, okay, engagement is good, it works, but how do we get back to talks? In the past, it was relatively easy because North Korea always wanted to engage with the US. From 1953 to basically 2019, it's usually been North Korea that has been clamoring for talks with the US, and it was the US side that was reluctant because North Korea, to put it simply, was an insignificant issue, right? And it was only by the early 1990s when North Korea started to develop a rudimentary nuclear program that we began engaging. And when we did engage in the 1990s and in the 2000s, there was significant engagement, what I call the height of engagement with North Korea, not just at the track 1 governmental level, but also the track 2 non-governmental and track 3 people-to-people levels as well. And there was even US congressional delegations going to North Korea fairly regularly during this period. But by the 2010s, with the start of the Obama administration, things reversed, and the US began to resume once again its more reluctant stance, what we now refer to as strategic patience. And between 2008 and the present, there was very minimal engagement with North Korea. You know, we engaged briefly in 2011 and 2018, 2019, but now it's the 2020s, and we're starting to see a strange situation where it is now the US that is open to engagement, you know, albeit in a very passive and tepid sort of way, but it's actually North Korea that does not want to engage, or at least it feels like it has the leverage so that it can wait and engage when it's ready or on its own terms. So, let me get some water. Well, I'll wait. You know, I feel like I understand the belief that, you know, whether North Korea engages or not is largely out of our control, that it goes in these cycles, right? Cycles of provocation and engagement, and we happen to be in a provocation cycle right now. You know, Ned Price, who is the State Department spokesperson, he said as much recently. He said that, you know, right now North Korea is a provocation cycle. But I just don't like the notion that we have to accept North Korean provocative behavior as a fait accompli, that we have to just sit here and take it, that we have to passively await a 7th nuclear test, that we have no agency to try and shape North Korea's behavior, and that our only policy tools are sanctions and isolation and military pressure. You know, I think we have many options at our disposal that could be used to try and entice North Korea back to the table and forego additional testing. Things like an end-of-war declaration, a moratorium on the deployment of US strategic assets to the Korean Peninsula, an end to the travel ban, offers of partial sanctions relief that are commensurate with North Korean denuclearization steps, humanitarian and COVID vaccine assistance, a reduction in the size and scope of joint military exercises, and all of these things conveyed in a letter from President Biden to President Kim Jong-un. None of these things materially undermine US national security, and I think the US is in a position to offer these things precisely because it maintains the strongest diplomatic, economic, and military position in the world, and even more so when it's combined with South Korea as a part of the alliance, right? And I'm not saying these types of concessions are cost-free or risk-free. They're not. There are risks. But there is academic literature indicating that rapprochement, an improving relation, typically starts when the stronger country makes a unilateral accommodation, which then sets off a process of reciprocation. This is what we need to be doing more of, taking diplomatic risks as long as we start with a robust foundation of security. But how do we actually overcome the political fear and mistrust and inertia to change our approach? And you know, this is the tougher question that involves advocacy and social movements, public attitudes that's, you know, frankly beyond my purview and area of expertise. I do think the participants here probably have a better idea of the type of role that the Catholic Church can play. My institute, the U.S. Institute of Peace, held a public discussion a few years ago on the role of the Catholic Church in peace building. I think you can probably still find the video on our website. And during that event, Bishop Robert McElroy of San Diego talked about the 4 dimensions of Catholics in peace building. And these include 1, the institutionalized role of the Pope and the Holy See; 2, the national churches in each country; 3, the Catholic organizations that aid peace building; and then 4, how the Catholic Church speaks about peace building, like Pacem in Terris and the Pope's statements. I think each of these dimensions could be used to advocate for peace building on the Korean Peninsula. I'm reassured that the Catholic Institute of Northeast Asia Peace is working towards this, and I hope that the Catholics on the Korean Peninsula and in the region can work together with the Vatican, the Catholic community in the United States, and elsewhere to advocate for a peaceful approach to North Korea. I've also noted in a previous CINAP conference that our president, Joe Biden, is Catholic, right? So perhaps the Catholic community can appeal to his faith in Catholic social teachings. I say that sort of facetiously, but I think at this point you gotta look for all angles, right? So I wanna thank you again for inviting me to say a few words, and I look forward to collaborating in the future and also in this later breakout session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Frank. Very perspective. 오늘의 마지막 연사는 한국말도 잘하시는 예수의 신부님이십니다. 맥나마라 신부님, 파더 데니스 맥나마라. 맥나마라 신부님은 조지타운 대학에서 한국학과 사회학을 가르치시는 교수님이시며 서강대 학교와도 이제 친근하십니다. 저도 이제 전공은 아닌데 학교 다닐 때 뵌 적이 있습니다. 한국어뿐 아니라 중국어에도 능통하시고 미국의 대아시아 정책에 영향력이 큰 학자이기도 하십니다. 맥나마라 신부님께 지역 사이의 다리 놓기, 북한과 지역별 시민 외교에 대해서 연사를 청하겠습니다. 신부님. 네.
So thank you for that wonderful introduction. What I'd like to talk about is kind of bring a conclusion to the presentations today from a little different perspective, and that's the perspective of civil society. And I think Frank has just brought that up already. I think that's been very well addressed. I'd just like to take it a little further. Diplomacy suggests an interaction, an effort to understand differences, a commitment to find common ground. We often define politics as the art of the possible. And I think the best definition of diplomacy is the art of the improbable. In politics, we work to bridge differences. In diplomacy, we seek to avert war. Diplomacy may be difficult, but the opposite is devastating. Partisan bickering plagues politics, but it's fatalism that stalks diplomacy. Fatalism threatens our efforts to advance peace in many areas of the world, and especially on the peninsula. Today, fatalism is my foil, public or civic diplomacy my path, and peace my goal. I am not a government diplomat, but I have been working on Beijing on civil dialogues for more than a decade. I am not an official, but I have been training Department of State officials for over 3 decades. I am not a negotiator, but I have been coordinating fora on Korea in Seoul and Washington, California, Hawaii, as a priest and professor for over 5 decades. Today, I wish to briefly describe what I mean by civic diplomacy. I will then turn to what I call knowledge nodes within networks at universities and policy institutes. Here, scholars and experts pursue intercultural dialogues, understanding cross-cultural and historical divides. These networks also promote cross-border exchanges of experience and expertise on North Korea. So I suggest today that closer regional cooperation among knowledge or epistemic networks in South Korea, Russia, China, Japan, and the United States could advance policy formation and peace on the peninsula. So first, briefly, civic diplomacy. Embassies will promote a public dialogue on their nation's priorities, an office called public diplomacy or cultural affairs. Responsibilities with the media usually absorb their energies, though institutional ties with universities and sometimes even policy institutes may also gain attention. Now, I use this term civic diplomacy to highlight the non-governmental or societal forma for policy discussions. As Frank actually did right before me, we can also distinguish civic diplomacy with levels or tracks of cross-border negotiation. Track 1 would be the highest level of official dialogues. And note, by the way, how I said highest. Why is government dialogues the highest and civil dialogues the lowest? It's really not that at all. It's just the practice that we've developed. In contrast, Track 2 meetings would be more non-official, but often include former government officials and government institutes. And Frank pointed to track 3, which would be more of a civil dialogue. I'm actually suggesting here a track 2.5 dialogue. That's more the kind of dialogue I've been involved in. Oftentimes when you're doing a dialogue from the United States on what we would call cross-cultural dialogue or on simply information dialogue, in the United States we have people coming out of the universities that we call civil society. In Beijing, they come out of the universities, but they're party members, and they're oftentimes part of the party apparatus. So it's very hard to say a track 3 dialogue. That's why I suggest 2.5. The term knowledge networks refers to established ties for exchanging both tacit and codified knowledge. Tacit refers to informal, often episodic channels, sometimes including both people, that is who you know, and processes, how you know. The latter term, codified knowledge, includes records, reports, more formal patterns of information that can be communicated in standardized formats. Domestic and national fora today dominate the landscape of knowledge networks on North Korea. The institutions and activities in South Korea, and particularly the University of North Korean Studies, well represented here today, are certainly the most prominent. Asian and Korea Policy Institutes here in D.C. and New York provide an excellent entree to U.S.-Korea policy. And these are supported by multiple universities across the United States with strong Korea units. We might look as well to similar networks in Japan, Russia, and China to fill out the picture of North Korea regional expertise, not national expertise, but regional expertise. Yet despite these developments in local expertise across national borders for intercultural dialogue and exchange on peninsular issues, these remain very, very limited. It's very hard for us to develop fora like this today, a real cross-national dialogue. So what impedes a cross-border integration of knowledge networks? Without doubt, the single overriding factor impeding both scholarship and policy dialogues is the absence of North Korea at the table. The question then is, how do we craft an effective cross-border conversation in civil society among the allies, among Russia and China and North Korea, without North Korea at the table? We cannot ignore the further problem of urgent security concerns dominating most discussions. And I must say here in Washington, D.C., as someone deeply interested in North Korea, it's very hard to get a North Korea dialogue which does not focus on security. I think that's a bit less so in New York and in the other parts of the United States, but we are heavily focused on security here in Washington. Given such difficulties, how can we foster a civic dialogue among these different knowledge networks? How can governments tap the expertise in civil society to shape a more effective policy for advancing peace? The issue of North Korea presents different challenges to each partner in this dialogue. It prompts different policy approaches for resolving these issues. Cross-cultural dialogues are designed to bring to the fore societal and cultural factors that divide us. Topics such as traditional and contemporary values, social ethics, and more practically family structure, generational changes, etc., provide a window on how nation-states come to define themselves. This approach to more fundamental values and structures does not focus on solutions, but rather on understanding. And secondly, a cross-fertilization among these different groups can develop when nations share expertise and information on critical issues. The civic dialogues provide a context less constrained by local politics, though not insulated from political differences. This would be the primary benefit of a more substantive, continuous regional dialogue, circles of scholars and policy analysts shaping and reshaping policy alternatives. A stronger, more dedicated bridging of local knowledge nodes across the region would help integrate and focus epistemic networks for policy formation. Among the partners, one already finds binational networks emerging, as South Korea in particular seeks partners abroad. including the CINAP conferences. Forums in Japan and the United States on North Korea issues already contribute to a stronger epistemic base. But who is not there? China remains the critical partner in this entire dialogue, with the best access to the policy and society of North Korea. Engaging relevant institutions in China on a regular basis in this cross-cultural type of dialogue, this cross-fertilization of knowledge nodes, is critical for bridging borders. Beyond that, initiating regional civic dialogues on the basis of existing binational exchanges would extend and deepen our resources of expertise and policy experience. And now let me just move to a conclusion about bridges. Returning from an Islamic Christian dialogue in Morocco 3 years ago now, Pope Francis did an interview on the airplane. It was published in American Magazine, April of 2019. He cited a novel by Ivo Andrić titled The Bridge, Andrina. He tells us that Andrić wrote that, and I quote, "The bridge is made by God with the wings of the angels so that we might communicate." Why? Because we can communicate, unquote. Francis continued, "This bridge is for human communication, and I have seen it here in Morocco. Walls are built to block communication, for isolation, and those who build the walls will become prisoners of those walls. I am proposing a bridging of knowledge brokers to advance peace on the peninsula. We can build out from a base of binational networks to regional exchanges among universities and policy institutes. This would help integrate existing knowledge resources while stimulating wider interest and deeper discussions. The political freedom and cognitive space to understand the past and to reimagine the present is a primary benefit of civic diplomacy. Policy stalemates and the fatalism that leads to discouragement remains a clear and present danger in peninsular discussions. A dialogue in civil society without the political constraints of, and I quote, official, unquote, exchanges can bring imagination to the fore. We need to recognize the present, but also to reimagine what could be the future on the peninsula. Thank you very much.
예, 신부님 감사합니다. 전문적인 식견과 또 복음적인 시각을 동시에 알려주셔서 컨퍼런스 주제도 잘 맞고 저희한테도 많은 걸 가르쳐 주셨습니다. 자, 지금부터 10분 정도 휴식을 갖고 자유로운 토론을 준비하도록 하겠습니다. 저는 사회자로서 이제 여기서 물러가고 토론 참석자로 자리를 옮겨서 지금부터 사회는 이대훈 박사께서 맡아주시도록 하겠습니다. 지금까지 굉장히 감사드렸고요. 10분 후에 다시 모이겠습니다. 감사합니다.
Hello, this is our final session, and it will run about 90 minutes. I'm very happy to moderate this last session. My name is Francis Daehoon Lee. I work with the CINAP and also with Peace Momo, Peace Research and Peace Education. My heart always goes for training for peace builders in and out of Korea. Welcome to the final session of the two-day conference, and I would like to have this session very participatory and interactive in the spirit that everybody's say and everybody's take is very important. So I cordially invite everybody to join one of the three tables. It's a forum. We will have dialogue. We will interact with the ideas and proposals of everyone. please come forward. Is it okay? Yes, thank you. And Professor Kim Sung-kyung, the first speaker, and the second speaker, Professor Andrew Yeo, are sitting in this table. So those of you who would like to have a deeper dialogue with the first two speakers, this is the table. Then we have Frank on this side of the table. So those of you who would like to interact with Frank's topic, this is the table. Then may I ask Father McNamara, can you move to the third table? Then that's the table to discuss about the role of civil society, track 2.5 civic diplomacy, and making changes. So that's that table. And I believe in every table there are bilingual participants, so please help others who may have difficulty in English or Korean. Is it okay? So the overall run of this final session is that we have two parts. First part is individual roundtable discussions with the speakers and their wonderful inputs. And that will have about half an hour, 30 minutes. Then after that, we'll come back as the large epistemic community, is that right? Epistemic community. So as one community of sharing ideas, then everybody can give inputs and ask questions to each other. So that'll run about 50 minutes. And please don't forget, after we spend the first and second parts of this session, everybody will come here for the final, very important session, photo session. Okay? So that's the run of this session. And I ask you sincerely that we had wonderful inputs. And some of you may remember 10 inputs from yesterday. And we had wonderful 5 inputs for today. So for half an hour, I ask you to have more exchanges, questions, proposals, especially in the light that this is our last session, so that we have to keep and collect new ideas and new proposals. So thank you. It's your time for half an hour. Introduce yourself a little bit. There. Everybody. No, it's a, yeah, without translation, it's a dialogue.
Having all the honorable participants and to sharing my ideas as well. Is this just Korean immigrants or any immigrants?
I'm Kim Park from Seoul National University. I belong to the Graduate School of International Studies. And my field is the history of U.S. colonization from 1945. And I'm so interested in the U.S. policies since 1940s.
It's personal or seems to be aware of I think the current policies, but still why haven't they accepted or engage with the proposals that turn on or Father McNamara suggested? That is the first question.
So I think there are several reasons. One is there is no appetite, no desire in D.C. to engage with North Korea. there is no benefit to trying to engage with a country that seems like a bad actor, right? There's no political benefit, right? It doesn't help you win elections if you engage.
모임 유지하는 단체인데 우리 아직도 세계 교회 협의회 호스팅하고 우리 아직도 만난 기회는 찾고 있어요.
지금 제주도 교체하는
맞습니다. 제주 동백꽃
왜 그걸 찾아오시죠?
왜냐면 전 2013년 때 한국 갔을 때 제주 사삼 대한 좀 배웠어요. 제주 가서 평화공원 방문하고 그때 후 미국 손님들 뭐 들어올 때마다 제주도 데려가 주세요. 그리고 안내해주고 좀 설명해주고 뭐 역사하고 그리고 미국의 책임 대한 계속 설명 가르치고 있어요. 그래서 그런 관심 계속 가지고 있어요.
So this badge is actually the symbol for yes,
So should I translate a little bit for you?
They think that they can try to change North Korea's behavior through sanctions. Although, again, I think the evidence shows that sanctions has not been effective in changing that behavior. And then the third reason, I think, is there's no political pressure that is pushing the White House or the Congress toward changing its North Korea policy, right? Because that's how, in the United States, that's how politics works. There has to be political pressure, lobbying, advocacy. There has to be all of that to change policy. So, for example, when you talk about the Middle East, Israel and Palestine, there's a very, very strong Jewish community that is effective at lobbying and advocating for its views, right? When it comes to the Korean Peninsula, there is no lobbying, right? The Korean community itself is it's small, relatively small. They don't.
그때 2006년이었는데 광주 대한 배웠는데 제주 대한 그 역사 못 들어봤어요. 제주 방문했는데 하나도 몰랐어요. 너무 신기했어요.
저의 그 연구자로서 그 제주도 그 해군기지 있잖아요. 점점 원래 일단 전에 했던 연구는 이제 기지 반대운동 했는데 이건 미국 기지는 아니지만 I was in Jeju for that. Of course, the peace activists explained like the Sasam. I mean, I had read about it before, but they took me to some of the sites.
Yeah. So we always take.
Who is putting pressure on the U.S. government? Typically, it's the citizens, right, through lobbying, advocacy, right? But of course, like I said, the community that pushes for a certain policy on North Korea is not very strong or effective. Who else can push the U.S. government? The South Korean government, right? I think the South Korean government is an equal partner in the U.S. alliance, right? So I think the South Korean government has a role here to push the U.S. government.
질문도 하고 좀 답답한 부분이 있어서 사실은 그 대화를 그렇게 시작을 했으면 좋겠습니다. 사실 앤드류 교수님이 얘기를 하시고 그다음에 프랭크 원 박사가 얘기를 했잖아요.
네.
그런데 앤드류 선생님이 제기하신 질문에 대한 답은 프랭크 원 박사한테서 나왔다고 저는.
중요한데 지금 현재는 한국 정부에서 미국 정부에 요구하고 압력을 가하지 않기 때문에 더군다나 이제 바이든 정부가 정책을 바꿀 이유가 없는 것 같다고 생각합니다.
If I could question too, doesn't it seem like because it changes, the government's changed, like in Korea, like the U.S. from Trump to Biden, your new, or South Korea's new president since May, the policies can change almost overnight, and it becomes for lack of consistency, I would think. Doesn't that pose problems too, Frank?
Absolutely. Yeah. I don't know how to.
Professor Guzman, you could talk about that better, but
you get tagged a foreign agent.
Oh, it's silly. But no, your advantages in South Korea are just wonderful for working with China. So I'm hoping we can develop more of a dialogue that way.
Partly, as I mentioned yesterday in my presentation, having a network.
Have substance, right? But I think actually the Singapore statement is very important because one, North Korea has not rejected the statement yet, right? North Korea has rejected many past statements, the Great Framework or different communiques, the six-party statement, all of that, right? But they have not rejected the Singapore statement. Second, it's a statement that was signed by a Republican president, but a Democratic president, Biden, has also supported the Singapore statement. So now you have bipartisan consensus. So I think we need to find areas where both sides can agree, and that may help the problem of changing administration.
일단은 한국에서 정권이 바뀔 때마다 이제 정책이 바뀌고
human being exchange program or economic assistance or such kind of the humanitarian cooperation will probably eventually do some effect on their political system, social security conditions, kind of the possible starting point of denuclearization, but someone understand, unfortunately, such kind of so-called spillover effect never happened, unfortunately, in the case of North Korea. So I don't know. It could be because of mainly because of North Korean problem, or it could be because of the actors' problem, such as South Korea or international society. But whatever the reason is, whatever it could be a network, could be economic exchange, or it could be.
바이든 행정부의 선의에 대해서도 믿고 있고 지금 바이든 행정부가 처한 어려움도 이해하고 있습니다.
Do you agree with the Biden administration also the challenges by the administration?
그런데 아쉬운 것은 대화를 하려면 대화를 하겠다라고 한다면 상대방이 있으니까 그 상대방의 입장, 상대방의 처지 이걸 헤아려야 되는데 그게 문제인 것 같습니다.
What you regret is to improve the job. Maybe like the Biden administration needs to understand the counterpart. North Korea does not.
북한은 어떤 표현을 쓰더라도 미국과의 관계 정상화가 가장 큰 관심사. 북한은 미국과의 관계 정서가 가장 큰 관심죠.
북한에.
네, 표라는 거.
From the perspective of North Korea, actually normalizing the relationship.
Something very small before I went there. So from the but my answer is not really that part the U.S. doesn't make a bigger gesture. They think about what that signals to other countries, but then should publish their articles in the famous American newspapers. And they try to globalize their own papers. But I don't know whether they still have that kind of policy. And the next year, they invited certain members from the Department of Sociology. And they asked the kind of lecture of the very Western theory of
대화를 하자면서 지금까지 진행되어 왔던 대화의 합의상 이런 걸 갖다가 지금 확실하게 인정을 안 한다는 거죠. 합의라는 건 뭐냐면 이 9.19 공동성명과 싱가포르 합의인데 그 합의문의 핵심은 북한의 비핵화와 북한이 원하는 자기네 안보 위협을 해소할 수 있는 북미관계 정상화와 한반도 평화체제 구축 이 두 가지가 비핵화와 이 두 가지가 동시에 진행해요. 그게 말 대 말 행동과 행동으로 동시에 같이 해야 되는데 지금 그 합의 자체를 확실하게 인정하고 시작을 않는다라는 거예요.
We read that the Biden administration does not seem to confirm like what the U.S. and North Korea previously agreed, but like such kind of like.
I'd like to express and globalize the Kim Jong-un thought, not fathers, not grandfathers. No, still, I think that they have some kind of might be have the route to contact the key scholars in the North Korea. But I don't know. It's because we are now passing the kind of tunnel of the COVID-19 pandemic. So I cannot track how much they changed it. And I cannot track still. They continue to have that kind of ideas. But I think that we can track in near future. And I think the meeting is very important. And the 3 years ago, actually, the North Korea, they suggested kind of the student meeting in Germany, in the Free University of the Free Berlin University. So they sent the North Korean students, 20 students in the winter vacation. And the Free Berlin University asked my university to send the 10 students, and not officially, but accidentally they can meet. But it could not be happened, but still, I think we can have some kind of breathing space.
상당히 단팔하는 형식을 원합니다.
So he suggests that probably Kim Jong-un wants to make agreement with the Biden based on the previous agreement.
이제 그걸 한국 정부가 해주면 좋겠는데 지금 이제 아쉽게 지금 윤석열 정부가 그걸 할 생각이 지금 없는 게 우리로서는 굉장히 아픈 거죠.
Hopefully, like South Korean administrations take the role of like make a bridge between the two countries, but unfortunately, the Israel administration does not.
그렇기 때문에 이런 상태에서 카톨릭이 뭔가를 해야 된다라는 그런 절박감과.
A university at that country or a think tank. So you would be going to a conference there.
North Korea never really wants to give anything more. So the problem is they stop, but then they
yes, we have a new campus in Doha.
I don't know if anyone has read John Bolton's book, because there's a lot about the negotiations in North Korea in this book. And he talks about when Kim Jong-un asked or proposed the elimination of all sanctions post-2016 in exchange for Yongbyon. President Trump said, no, that's too much. If you want relief from all the sanctions, then you need to...
And I think that's what we've been trying to discuss the last 20, 30 years about North Korea. So,
저도 그 질문이 있었는데, 그래서 어떻게 보면 이제 2018년, 19년에 일어났던 게 아예 신뢰가 없는 상태니까 조금씩 우리가 신뢰를 하나씩 단계별로 갑자기 이렇게.
Bolton did not want any agreement with North Korea, right? And so he was worried that Kim Jong-un would say, okay, let's do partial sanctions. But what happened was Kim Jong-un basically seemed to ignore the proposal for partial sanctions relief. John Bolton was very relieved, and then nothing happened, right? But it's a missed opportunity because they negotiated in Hanoi for 1 day, maybe? Not even 1 day? I mean, it took 1 day, but the actual hours might have been, you know...
있는 거였는데 지금 상황은 또 그때랑 또 너무 달라진 게 이제는 사실 현실적으로 기술적으로 이제 북한의 핵무기라는 게 완전히 완성이 된 상황이기도 하고 그리고 북한도 뭐 얼마 전에 이제 아예 법에다가 이제 우리는 해방가라는 거를 이렇게 완전 명시해가지고 이제 다시는 이제 비핵화 가지고는 어떻게 보면 비핵화라는 게 협상용으로 이제 들어갈 자리가 없어진 것 같아가지고 저는 굉장히 되게 절망적으로 느껴졌거든요. 근데 어떻게 보면 미국의 북한에 바라는 바나 아니면 대한민국이 북한에 바라는 바나 계속 비핵화라는 거를 내세우고 있잖아요. 북한과 이렇게 대화하기 위한 조건으로. 근데 그렇게 하면 진짜 완전히 아무데도 이제는 더 이상 북한도 이제 거부를 하기 때문에 아무데도 못 가게 되는 상황이 왔다고 생각하는데 이 상황에서 그럼 미국이랑 대한민국이 비핵화를 버려야 되는 걸까요?
So the real 너무 답답한 게가 미국 정부는 all the policymakers say we know that North Korea is never going to denuclearize. 뭐 그렇게 말을 하는데 but we won't change our position. The U.S. government position is always it's going to be denuclearization is the goal. Even though they know that that's not possible in public, they have to say that, and that's what I don't always understand. But the signaling, I think it's because of the commitment to global non-proliferation that they don't ever want to say that denuclearization is the goal. So my suggestion is, well, why don't you then? If you talk about arms control, that would be an intermediate. You can say arms control is an intermediate step, and then we can begin talking about denuclearization once there's trust put in place. The other problem with the Hanoi summit is, so I have a student, 저의 학생, he's a PhD student. He worked for Steve Biegun in the State Department.
Between Trump and
이번에 한미협회에서 그걸 받아가지고 보도를 했어요.
So there seems to be like a letters between Kim Jong-un and it was revealed from.
제가 아쉬운 건 뭐 제 생각이기도 하고 이제 나는 많은 한국인들 생각이라고 하는데 이 중장기적으로 한국 입장에서는 미국과의 동맹이 필요하고 공고했으면 하는 희망을 갖고 있는데 미국 정부나 지금 미국의 지식인들은 이 단기적 관점만 있지 중장기적 관점이 없는 것 같습니다.
Their ideological orientation. So it's kind of irony with the North Korean program. Of course, I'm not saying that networking or communication or peaceful contact is not important. That's not my point. But I would like to point out exactly the correct situation of North Korea. As we see, the sanctions are not working, and simultaneously, such kind of the opposite reverse contact trial toward North Korea may not applicable. That is
really about his own legacy and making news and being the center of it.
Well, I do think the dialogue
but
with
suddenly
Vietnam,
he changed his mind. He said, like, let's go big. Why don't you denuclearize and completely get rid of your nuclear weapons? And of course,
the dialogues that they continued, obviously, with East Germany and Korea.
큰 장점이 있습니다.
Like as a long-term plan, maybe the United States government would take advantage by disengaging North Korea from like China, so and then make the North Korea as like kind of the buffer country.
그건 미중 간의 전략 경쟁에서 매우 중요한 거죠.
We're learning about North Korea, and the more that we learn about Korea, it'd be wonderful if that meant we could change things in Korea. But even if we don't change things in Korea, it's important that we know what's going on in North Korea. It's one way of understanding South Korea. Looking at South Korea without North Korea is just not helpful.
Anything to add? I really believe because when I served the problem and as president lawyer, I realized that South Korean and American, all kind of nations, people really don't know about North Korea's real North Korea situation.
그런 고립과 봉쇄의 전략이 나온 결과는 뭐냐 그러면 중국에 대한 과도한 의존이 커지고 있다. 핵 개발은 계속하고 있다. 그리고 외부의 공격이 내부 단합의 명분으로 작용하고 있다. 이렇게 돼 있거든요. 그래서 미국의 고립과 봉쇄 전략은 미국이 원하는 결과가 아니라 원치 않는 결과만 지금 잔뜩 나오고 있단 말이에요. 그래서 이런 불행한 일을 끊으려면 당장 북한이 다 털고 비핵화할 것 같지는 않고 그렇다면 이 고립을 풀어주는 거기에서 새로운 전략이 시작되는 것이 옳지 않다.
Defectors who want to use the North Korea's human rights for their funding. Yeah, from the American and Europe case. Maybe the 80s and 90s that period, the human rights abusement is very serious, I know, but it's 30 years later. Now it's under the Kim Jong-un's system. Everything is almost changed. The women's and the children's and handicapped persons' human rights, everything is changed because of he also have a study at this Swiss. So he also thinking about the concept of the human rights. It's different. There are very big differences between his father and his grandfather and Kim Jong-un's thinking about the human rights concept. That's why first is understanding North Korea's real North Korea situation. And the next step is understanding why North Korean defectors and North Koreans act like that. Because they always have a very
Now please allow me to count 1, 2, 3 to close the first part of our exchange. Thank you. So now I count 1 and 2 and 3. Can you give big round of applause to everybody who had a good exchange? Thank you very much. Thank you for very precious dialogue. Actually, it's all participatory dialogue for the first time during the 2 days. So it was very special. Thank you. Now I'd like to invite everyone to the plenary. Everybody exchanged ideas and reflections. So for 50 minutes, I propose that we synthesize, we sum up our reflections of the 2 days, also including your new ideas, new perspectives, or maybe the inputs that we have missed by any chance. So now this time, you have to use your microphone on the table. The translation will be given, so if necessary, please use the kit, use the machine. Okay? Now, first, I have asked Jung-min Han, who is PhD candidate at the University of Pittsburgh, to give his own observations of the forum, at the same time, give us with new ideas and new proposals for possible changes. So please welcome Jung-min Han. You can speak on the table. Thank you. With a microphone. Here.
Hello? Yes. It's working. So, yeah, maybe like I would be the least qualified speaker here, but like let me just speak just for a few minutes. So actually, like while participating this like event, I just like look back, like actually 10 years like before when I was in New York. So I studied at Stony Brook University, which is located at Long Island. And then I was exposed to IR study at that time first. And then that actually motivated myself a lot to think about the North and South Korean relationship. So it's almost like 10 years ago. And then like I just started like to develop my own career. So when I think about like North and South Korean relationship, I thought that like diplomatic like development like in the East Asia must be important. So I went to China and studied IR there, and after that I just came back here. So like it's been like more than 10 years since I started thinking about like peace like between North and South Korea, and also like make connection between like Catholic values and like a peace like between North and South Korea like politically. So actually I want to emphasize that like it took like 10 years, more than 10 years, but I always failed to like successfully persuade my mother or my wife to think about this. Yeah, I will start talking about this to my daughter later, but not this time. My daughter is just only 4 years old, so in any way, so I whenever just talk about this, like peace, like between North and South Korea, and then why this is important, even within like a Catholic value. And my mom is Catholic too, and she always go to church. She likes. I'm not sure like how can I call this like in English, but she always go to Legio, like, so she's a really like passionate like Catholic, and then. So, but even though like whenever I talk about this, like why this is like has a really strong connection with Catholic value, like peace between North and South Korea, it's a really important issue in Catholic. But I never actually like succeed in like persuading my mom. So this actually experience like gave me kind of like research motivation, like when I'm like studying like political science in University of Pittsburgh now. So like I think like plus actually I have participated in like CINAP's events like I think like for 8 years, almost 8 years, and then I can see lots of like peace activists and the fathers and the people like Catholic people like who like really like value the peace between North and South Korea. But I really want to talk about the people who are not here. The people like my mother, like my wife, actually, whom never be persuaded by me. So I always fail. So why is that? Like it's really hard to actually persuade them. So the thing is that unlike us who have a really strong like belief about this peace, or like connection between peace and Catholic Church, Catholic people or like just normal like South Korean public may not have that strong belief. So it must be hard to talk to them or deliver our ideas to them who do not have a consistent idea with us. So, but when there is any issues about peace with North Korea or war with North Korea, whatever it is like related to North Korea, maybe they may want to use like an information shortcut to develop their own like foreign policy attitudes. So, for example, they may use like partisanship. They may use like some like the United States or like other allies like information, something like that. So the thing is that because they do not have really like well-developed idea about like North Korea, and they rarely think about that, so they are really like swayed by the situation by situations. So given this observation, maybe I think, so I mean, this forum is really important. I'm always like this, and then give me like lots of motivation. But I think it is really important to deliver our ideas, what we are developing here, to the public who are not here. So maybe that is one challenge or one mission that we are facing now. So maybe like I need to talk to like the Father Peter Kang later about this. But yeah, I just like kept thinking about this like in the last 2 nights, So maybe there must be a way that we can communicate better with the people outside and like talk about, persuade them to pursue peace because they are the most important parts. So actually they are the largest group of the South Korean who can influence the foreign policy in South Korea. So, yeah, our voice is important, but maybe broaden our voice to the other community should be prioritized too. So thank you, I appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So Jungmin's point, in my view, is that how to create channels of communication and channels of sharing information to those who have not come to the community of common values and common knowledge. Very important first input, thank you very much. Now for exchange of reflections and final inputs, I invite Sumi Jeon as the next speaker, a human rights lawyer and who has been working on North Korean refugees for a long time. And I think she will fill us with missing points. Thank you very much.
Thank you for introducing me about myself, Andy. My name is Sumi Jeon as a human rights lawyer and give a lecture at the Sungshin University. Thank you for inviting us this moment. I'm so happy to hear with you because there are a lot of people interested in the peace and human rights in gathering together and discussing about this issue. And I served the North Korean defectors almost 20 years. I realized that maybe I just want to give a short point. The first thing is United States do not use the North Korea as a tool to give a pressure. Yeah, I think that the United States has a very important standard, the democracy, the human rights. That's very ideal. I really respect that about that point. But I realize that that's not a good way to approach the improve the North Korean human rights and North Korean defectors' human rights also. So that's why I asked the United States government, U.S. to stop using the North Korean human rights as a tool to pressure the North Korea. Because of the high pride of North Korean defectors, when the Japan and the America make a law, the North Korea human rights law 2004 and 2006, the response of the North Korea's administration is very extremely angry. So they think it's their own area about the human rights issue. Why? They think that they kind of make a law about the North Korea's human rights that could be one of the invention about their sovereignty. So that's why when we try to mention about the human rights and peace, the first step is we must understanding about their thinking pattern. What's the meaning of the human rights in North Korea? Following their textbook and the testimony of North Korean defectors, the human rights is the imperial state, United States, and the South Korea wanna destroy their system. That's why they call each other human rights. That could be one of the just a political tool to destroy the North Korea system. So that's why the image of human rights in North Korea is just an enemy's tool. So that's why it really hard to understand the real meaning of the human rights when I met the North Korean defectors in South Korea. They even thinking about the real concept of the human rights. So that's why I always try to human rights is for protecting yourself. And when I give out counseling with North Korean female defectors, when they got a sexual crime from the South Korean soldiers and police, they always blame themselves and try to kill themselves always. So that's why I always give up advice about the concept of the human rights, real human rights, not just a political tool. And how can you save? How can North Korean female defectors save their life by themselves? How can they protect themselves in South Korea also? Why the South Korea's police and the military service give up sexual crime to North Korea? I think that it could be one of the big economic and the historical background. I mean, the Korean War. So many South Koreans prosecutor and South Korean military service and South Korea's police thinking about the North Korea defectors is a spy. Exactly the dual spy, because they already betray their motherland and come to South Korea, and it also meaning that they could betray the South Korea and go back their country again. So that's why the prosecutor and the police and military service always checking and watching the North Korean defectors, their word and the route. Where today, what kind of people they meet? Today, what kind of word they make a conversation with the other people? They're always checking the route. But it's a democratic system. It's impossible, I know. But because of the South Korea's constitution, Article 3, following the constitution, Article 3, North Korea is our territory. That's why, what's the meaning of the North Korea following under our constitution system? North Korea is just illegal institute. That's not a country to us. I mean the South Korea. That's why the prosecutor and police, the kind of police and the military service thinking about the North Korean defectors is just one of the enemy's people and betrayer and your spy. That's all. That the purpose of their approaching the North Korean defectors is just get information about the recent North Korea's information. That's why we have to think about what's the meaning of the North Korea to South Korean people, especially the triangle session, prosecutor, police, and military service. And we must think about how can we, and the most tragic thing is, so many, when we try to put their shoes, just common North Korean defectors really hate the moment when the foreigner blame their leader and their regime. Because, maybe when we there push you, you can understand their point. Because maybe our president, our President Moon and President Yoon or Moon, maybe someone is like Moon or Yoon. It depends on their personal type, but maybe foreigner blame our nation's leader, really feel very uncomfortable, even though I don't like him. So it shows that just a common North Korean defectors who is not politicalized by someone, they really miss their motherland. That's why every holiday they go to the borderline, which can see their motherland, and they try to make a contact with the family who living in North Korea also. So I think that finally we have to think about the America and South Korea and in the world must knowing about the real North Korea situation and understanding about the high pride of North Korean defectors case. Yeah. When I get a chance, I want to talking about this issue later. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Please, yes. Thank you for highlighting the multiple contexts and dimensions when we try to understand the human rights violations of North Koreans. Very complex. Thank you very much. Now, can I ask you, so how was the forum for you? What is your final reflections? And if you didn't have a chance, what do you want to propose for our next steps? what have we achieved in the 2 days of this forum? What are the most important topics for you? Can I open the floor for this final reflection? May I invite Jin Hyung Byun? No, he raised his hand first, so use the microphone. 3 minutes maximum, please.
I want to make 2 points. It is ever first time to meet U.S. bishops and Korean bishops face-to-face meet and talking about the North Korean issue. I wondered, because in the process of this conference, we have experienced that so many U.S. bishops are there. Even now, they don't know about the South Korean bishops' effort to advance the peace in Korean Peninsula. So I think this conference should not be a single one-time event. So it has to be developed in the future. So I thank you to Professor Love, that she has an idea to use some kind of solidarity visit of U.S. bishops outside of the U.S. territory. So I think it should be taken into consideration. Second point, I wondered yesterday as a moderator, the papal nuncius, Archbishop Pierre, was present from the start point of the conference to the end, and he was attend to the dinner too. I think it is exceptional. Sometimes the presence of the papal nuncius means the presence of His Holiness himself. So this very long, exceptional presence of his nuncius should not be interpreted as isolated from the intention or the interest of the Pope Francis. So this point should be also taken into consideration in the future of these projects of the CINAP. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Wonjun Ju has outlined some of the key achievements, if I may, of the 2-day forum by the very presence and interaction of the continuous participation of the key speakers and participants. Thank you very much. I think that point should be noted very clearly in our record. And may I invite Professor Byun or Munsu Park to make your reflection and proposals?
예, 소개받은 변진웅 교수입니다. 제가 호남대학 교수와 인천가톨릭대 교수를 역임을 했고 서울에 있는 캐톨릭 신학대학에서 22년 동안 제가 북한학을 강의를 했었습니다. 그래서 제가 우리 앤드류 교수님하고 너무 얘기하고 싶어서 여기 왔었고요. 사실은 제가 이제 많은 질문을 드렸고 거기에 대한 답도 제가 들었습니다. 그것이 저희 가톨릭 동북아 평화연구소에서 이 이벤트를 기획을 하면서 정말 원했던 그러한 그 내용에 가장 적합한 내용이었다고 생각을 합니다. 제가 드렸던 그 질문은 우리 앤드류 교수님과 프랑크 엄 박사님의 그 현실 인식은 동일했다고 생각을 합니다. 그러나 그 방향성과 해법은 달랐고 그런 차원에서 프랑크 엄이 얘기하셨던 여러
perhaps are a bit different. Frank talked about how we need to overcome quite some obstacles that maybe U.S. had not been heating for a long time. Frank had pointed to the stalling, the cause of which is really from the stance taken by the U.S. the Hanoi no deal, it does seem like North Korea did want something small. It wasn't looking for something comprehensive, but U.S. wanted a comprehensive dismantling of the nuclear program of North Korea. So expectations were not well managed back then. And as to what the Biden administration is looking for, what I did understand from today's conference is that that there's a lot of sarcasm. And that there are many cynics on in Washington. And when you talk about having a meeting without any condition at any time, anywhere, but if you are sarcastic or cynical about the possible results to come from such meeting, I think it's problem. The problem really stems from this posture of the Americans. Americans don't realize what they have caused. I actually spoke to Professor Ye. Don't seem to give enough credit to the brave courage that the North Korea had to bring up in order to have the meeting with the Americans. Like you said, North Korea is about a small, weak country, and that the U.S. is a monumental rock. If you wanted an egg to be hit against a rock, it could only hurt the egg. It doesn't matter how rapid or fast or heavily the rock was thrown. I mean, North Korea is about a weak country, that's true, but they did try to somehow work out a deal with the U.S. and the Americans because of their cynicism and sarcasm towards the North Koreans. Just couldn't bring about any good results. So expectations were not properly managed. And going forward, just saying that the window is open is not enough. You really need to invite the other side to come to the window and start discussing. You can't just say it's open, but you have to have a bridge that allows them to come across. Just like Mr. Priest, Father McNamara had stated, we have to build a bridge that allows North Koreans to walk across and come to the window for discussion. And so my suggestion at this point is that we have to realize that just because North Korea is not engaging in talks with the U.S. Does not mean that they do not want to talk. They are willing to engage in discussions with the religious leaders. North Korea did make some overtures through their religious, spiritual leaders, indicating that they will start talking if they were allowed to be in Washington D.C. and meeting with religious leaders in the U.S. and also from South Korea. So perhaps the bishops, maybe the Council of Bishops in the U.S. Could invite the religious leaders or other leaders from North Korea. So it's not like it never happened. There were some prayer meetings which were held with North Koreans in attendance. So we could have the organization of the priests or maybe the Council of Bishops extend an invitation to North Koreans to come to Washington D.C. So it could be religious leaders that start the conversation, and it doesn't have to be big. Small steps are good enough for now.
Give a big round of applause for Professor Ben. Thank you. 감사합니다. If I may highlight, I think Professor Byun kind of summed up the idea of bridge and idea of civic diplomacy and possibly opening a door with accommodation on the side of the U.S. The churches, Catholic churches of the two countries may work together to invite our counterparts in DPRK for the first part, religious channels of dialogue. Thank you very much. Now, may I invite Munsu Park for your highlights, reflections, and possibly proposals for the next step.
박문수라고 합니다. 오늘 발표를 어제 들었다면 미국 주교님들이 많이 도움을 받으셨겠다 하는 게 첫 번째 드리고 싶은 말씀이고요.
I lament that they are not here
저희
today.
안내 테이블에서 나눴던 이야기는
And the discussions we had during the round table here today,
여태까지 쓰는 방법들이
we have discussed that the American approach thus far has not been effective, but why? Even knowing that the failures are there, do American administrations continue to pursue failure after failure when they know it's not going to work? Why do they still insist on it? Back when I was in school, I wrote a dissertation about San Francisco and North Korea. I have, for the longest time, wondered why is it a status quo on the Korean Peninsula for the longest time? And this meeting today brought me some insights. Sometimes when you can't resolve a problem right away, you just manage it. You try to keep status quo. So status quo might be a solution. Maybe not optimal, but it's something that you can learn to manage. So a known devil is perhaps better. And this is an insight that I take with me back home, and perhaps this was the deep-seated doubts that I had in my mind already, and I knew perhaps I just wasn't able to articulate it until today. Today's forum had been wonderful. I know a lot of people were involved, and also many bishops were involved on both sides. I want bishops to be here more with their warm bodies present in these conferences. You hold a conference and you're not here. That is a bit of a problem. I think we need to better coordinate these meetings. And also amongst the bishops from Korea, it does seem like there is not a consensus in what we are trying to achieve here in today's meeting. And this is a missed opportunity when the bishops are unable to attend the conference that they held.
Thank you very much. That was Munsu Park.
감사합니다.
And who would like to make the next reflections or proposals? May I invite Jennifer then? Who also worked very hard to organize this forum.
I really appreciated so many of the presentations, particularly how they describe the situation on the peninsula as it is understood from many different angles. I appreciated that we had presentations from Japan and from the United States and from South Korea. Wouldn't it be wonderful to have voices from North Korea? Since we're discussing Korean peace, Pope Francis continually talks about encounter as a very important thing for expanding our own faith, encounter with God, encounter with one another, even to expand our faith, to know God in one another as well is very important. I feel that as Catholics, we should be at the forefront of pushing for people-to-people engagement, whether it's scholarly engagement, whether it's governmental engagement, whether it's humanitarian engagement. So I find encouragement that this kind of new encounter is happening, that it's happening here in Washington, D.C., but I hope that our next conference can include encounter with North Korean people.
Thank you very much. Presence of the absence. Thank you very much for highlighting the point. Now I move to Professor Seung-Hoon Heo from Japan and Korea. Please.
Hi everyone, my name is Emilia and I'm Associate Professor of International Relations at Ritsumeikan Asia Pacific University. 2 points of personal concluding reflection that I had in my mind. First one is that we have been talking about North Korean issue in bilateral framework, so US and Korea, which should be the main channel for the future as well, but I don't remember whether it was Frank or Andrew who reconfirmed that North Korea issue is not on the top priority agenda for US government anymore. So I was wondering whether we should find or we should attempt again to build institutional framework in Northeast Asia with Japan. We had 2 Japanese people here, Japan, Taiwan, or China. We already had that effort in the past. It never really had the fruits out there, but parallel to US-Korea direct relationship, I thought maybe finding a new way, because this issue is a top priority for Northeast Asia, to have a regional framework again to discuss about this issue, maybe for next year. I heard that this conference is going to be held in Japan next year, so that could be a continuing topic. And the second one, what was his name, Han Jong-min, who just mentioned that he had difficulty even persuading his wife and mom to raise the public awareness or talk about the importance of this peace issue in North Korea. I sympathize with him. We are here all passionate people who wants to do something for the peace in North Korea, but as someone teaching at university, this is not a hot topic, not a fancy topic to talk or to think or discuss. There is an indifference out there. It's not even a question about agreeing or disagreeing with economic sanction. They don't care. And I think we should find a better way to raise public awareness out there. And as my tiny role I can play at university, I guess I should find a better way to talk about this issue and teach there. We haven't talked about education at all yesterday, but maybe for next year, I propose that maybe we could also have a panel on peace education. We had important people here who never got a chance to talk in peace education field as well. So these are my 2 points.
Thank you. Thank you. And personally, thank you very much for highlighting peace education. I've been eager to speak about that, didn't have a chance. And I also highlight that her emphasis on regional frame, regional approach in dealing with inter-Korean conflict and tensions. I hope in our next CINAP conferences, this regional frames and regional approaches are more highlighted. Thank you very much. Now, may I move to the next speaker, if any? Mariam, would you like to, or Professor Kim? Yes, please. Use the microphone.
저희 가톨릭 동북아평화연구소에서 이제 이번까지 하면 6번째 국제학술 대회를 했습니다. 쭉 그 과정 흐름을 좀 돌이켜 보면 이제 어제 오늘 대체로 공감대
yesterday and today, as we shared yesterday and today, so the direct threat to the Korean peninsula is the possibility of war. So the North Korea's nuclear issue is the most pending issue, it's the biggest obstacle. So they are trying to resolve it. However, we all have this consensus that there should be no war. And secondly,
무력으로 하는 방법이 안 되니까 경제 제재를 통해서 하는데
military force is not going to war. We're trying to have this economic sanction. But this economic sanction is in direct violation of the social doctrine of Catholic Church. And also we feel that if it's really necessary, it should be in the short term. However, this is going to be a very comprehensive target, and if it's going to be done for a very long time, we believe that there can be a devastation mission for the humanitarian cause. So I think Bishop Lee Ki-hyun yesterday mentioned the humanitarian issues with regard to this economic sanction, and he also mentioned that there should be efforts to find ways to resolve that. So the bishops who participate here and also the participants, I'm sure they all agreed with this. So taking one step forward, I want to mention that
미국 정부 대표에서 국무회의에서 나왔고
the State Department sent a representative, and
미국 대사가 나와서
and also the South Korean government's representative, the ambassador of in the United States, Cho Tae-yong were there yesterday. So they all mentioned that we want to have dialogue with North Korea. We don't want war. So we keep telling them to have dialogue. That was their perspective. So, but the dialogue from the perspective of Yoon Suk-yeol administration is that, so the policy is that basically based on the principle of denuclearization first, and then you're going to make you prosper. So that's the preconditions to the dialogue. And the response of North Korea is like this. So you are asking me to give up nuclear forces. That's really the key part of the survival of this regime, with a few boxes of items. So that was the response for North Korea. So they call it like bold imagination. So to have dialogue, because you have the counterpart, you need to understand the context that you have. You also need to understand the agreements you have had so far. But if you say that you want to have dialogue without considering all those in the past, would that work? So what has been agreed so far is that so they are saying at least that they want to do denuclearization because that's the promise from their ancestors. But they do have the preconditions to that. The reason for developing nuclear weapon is because it threatens the survival of the regime. So they want to get rid of the risk to the survival of the regime. So they want to go in parallel with survival of the regime together with denuclearization. I think that's the key part of Singapore Agreement. But if USA says that they want to have dialogue without considering all those, would that be an appropriate attitude? And also the Yoon administration is that we believe that the alliance should be reinforced. But it seems like the US administration only has very short-term perspective. Dr. Frank mentioned that the US government
제재만 가지고서는 원하는 바를 미국이 원하는
has not really achieved what they wanted with military deterrence and economic sanctions. So he pointed out that there should be new pathways.
그게 전부 다 단기적인 이유란 말이죠.
But all those things are very much short-term based. So
편익과 비용에 대한 얘기를 하는데 그 분석도
when we
너무
talk about this
단기적이다.
cost and benefits, even that analysis
미국
is very much
정부가
based
계속
in
대화를
short-term
북한
perspective.
정부에 한다라는 게 지금 상대방이 들을 수 있고 상대방이
Having this dialogue
원하는 바를
between
전혀
these
고려치
two.
않고 대화하자는 말로만
I mean, from the US
대화하자는
side, it seems like they are not
거거든요.
really
대화의
considering their
진정성이 있냐.
counterpart.
지금 북한
So are they
입장에서는
sincere enough?
이 기본적인 걸
I
확인한다면 이런
think
거죠.
from the
제가
North Korean
짧게
perspective,
마무리하겠습니다.
they want to be like.
정책 목표는 이 미국과의 관계 정상화입니다.
So their
그건
policy
의심할
goal
바가
is to have
없는
normalized
거예요.
relationship
자,
with the United
그래서
States.
그
There's no doubt on that.
하노이에 김정은이
So
그
at Hanoi,
기차를
that's
타고
why
온
Kim
거고.
Jong-un took train for like.
자, 그래서 기대로
20
와봤는데
hours.
결과적으로 트럼프한테 뒤통수를 맞은 거죠.
But they were backstabbed
그래가지고
by
다시 돌아갔을 때
President
김정은
Trump.
체민은
So
그야말로
when Kim
이 말이
Jong-un
아니게
went
된
back
거죠.
to North
그래서
Korea, he lost
후유증이라는
his
게 첫째
face.
있고
So he had this
그리고
trauma,
이제 지금
and
바이든
also
행정부가
the
대화하자고
Biden
말로 하면서
administration.
실무자들끼리 만나자고 하는데
They want to have dialogue. They want to have working level meetings.
될 일이 없다라는 건
But there's nothing
북한은
they can.
너무나 뼈저리게
North Korea already
안다는 거죠.
understands that they cannot
그래서
get anything
실무자
out of
차원에서의
working
대화
level
가지고는 실질적으로
dialogue.
타결이 안 되기
There
때문에
cannot be any practical conclusion from that.
정상 간 담판을 뒷받침할 수 있는 고위급
So there should
대화와
be senior level meetings
정상 간
and summit
담판에 의해서
meetings
큰 걸 매듭지어야 된다.
to get something out of the meetings between the two countries based on the distrust they have right now. That's the desperate message from North Korea, but they are just the unit side is just ignoring that and just asking for working level dialogue. So they don't understand this.
뭐랄까요? 질문하는 건데. 그래서 제가 이제 길게 말씀드린 이유가 뭐냐면 어제 오늘 지금 계속 대화에 대한
so we talk about this dialogue from the government side or others,
실질적 대화를 하기 위해서 대화의 진정성에 대해서 우리
we need to think about the sincerity of dialogue. And I think from the Catholic community should raise questions about that
의견을 갖다
and also
모았으면 하는
gather
그런
our
생각 때문에
insights and opinions on that.
감사합니다.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. If I may summarize. Yes, Dr. Beck made 3 points. First, war is never an option. Second, pay attention to humanitarian impact of economic sanctions. Number 3, the current approach to open dialogue with North Korea is not so effective. We need a new approach. Thank you very much. Now, I'd like to spend 10 or 15 more minutes for final points, reflections or proposals for the next step, please. Professor Park, In-Hui Park, or Tae-Kyuk Park, or anyone else? Yes. Thank you.
많이 배웠습니다. I have learned a lot. Even though I've been doing research on the Korean Peninsula and the inter-Korean relations and U.S.-Korea relations more than 2 decades, but still I recognize that there's something that I have to learn more. Peace building and trust building, communication, peaceful engagement, and friendly approaches to North Korea is definitely necessary, and I believe peaceful solution is the only answer to permanently solve the problem of the Korean security condition. But at the same time, I have recognized that there is interesting kind of irony. I'm suggesting 2 different cases, situations. The first one is we know that the sanction is not working in case of North Korea. We say sanction is not working because of the uniqueness of the North Korean political system. Economic pressure and difficulties and sanction never deliver any meaningful spillover effect to change their political system. And ironically, at the same time, in the opposite case, we are saying that peaceful contact, communication, networking, conversation is important, right? That's what we recognized yesterday and today. Because such kind of contact will deliver spillover effect eventually to change their political system. So I see kind of the irony in case of the economic sanction, because of their uniqueness is not working. But in case of the peaceful engagement, regardless of their political uniqueness, it may be deliver meaningful outcomes. So of course, I'm not saying that engagement is not important. That's not my message. But I only would like to point out that, if we recognize that they do have a kind of the unique political system, belief system, ideological orientation, it is necessary to apply such kind of uniqueness to every different type of condition. That is my message, and obviously I do believe the peaceful contact and engagement is necessary. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Park. Yes, again, highlighting the tremendous difficulty that we are facing in the need to create unique and new ways to deal with DPRK. Thank you very much. Yes, please, Miriam.
Just to pick up on the point that you raised, we struggle with this in both the peace building academic work as well as looking at the practical side. And the term we use is strategic peace building, because you're right, the evidence, if you just do the grassroots level stuff, how will that ever reach up and change the political dialogue or the elite level behavior? But in the contrast, if you do the elite level and you don't do the lower levels of grassroots or grass tops, what we call, you will get the outcome I discussed yesterday. You may get a peace accord in Colombia, you may get a peace accord in the Philippines, but you haven't built the consensus behind it, so that will not last. And some of that we see in this case as well. So when there have been moments when the elites were working to greater engagement, there was the very type of discrimination, the very type of stereotyping at the public level that gets them in a box that they don't have the domestic constituency for peace. So the key is that we have to be doing these things at the same time. We have to be putting pressure on elites and offering opportunities and creating incentive structures for them to want to engage, while also doing the engagement at other levels. And that's why I think both religious actors and academic actors, policy think tanks, are some of those connecting nodes, those connecting links. We have connections with more grassroots citizens, but we also can reach up to the elites, as the bishops were doing today in their meetings on Capitol Hill and their meetings with the State Department, trying to take those messages to higher levels. So the connecting node is key. It's very possible, it's really important to work on, and we have some unique networks that can do that type of connections that other types of groups don't have. And so I think that's, in terms of Catholic peace building, when you look demographically, we do have some unique demographic things like that. We're the largest nation with the smallest sovereign state. So we have a diplomatic corps operating in all these countries. We have these universities operating in all these countries. So those are just some institutional structures that can be those connecting nodes that we can think about how to leverage them. I think CINAP's been doing a good job in leveraging those. I think you're thinking strategically about where your next conferences will be to continue to build out those networks and continue to build those connections. So I applaud you for it.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I also fully second your point, strategic peace building. We need to connect all the dots and little actions from long-term and short-term, mid-term, thinking in triple levels, multi-levels, triple dimensions, etc. Thank you very much. And then, yes, please.
Hi, I just wanted to follow up from what Professor Marianne Love had just said about building out the engagement at the people-to-people level. On one hand, there's a lot of difficulties in promoting that sort of engagement with North Korea, in part because of the North Korea regime and its political structure. And we have to ask, do the North Koreans want that type of dialogue? So as Professor Park mentioned, for some who talk about the dialogue and engagement, it's about trying to get North Korea to change in a certain direction, and that's exactly what North Korea doesn't want, because there's some risks involved for the regime. If you have more outsiders coming into North Korea, or if North Koreans are coming out of the country to have engagement and dialogue, it does bring in information, and it can be risky for the regime. So one suggestion is, if you're going to have dialogue with North Koreans, it may have to come from countries other than the United States, or from citizens outside of the United States or South Korea or Japan. You may have to look at African countries or countries in South America that don't have an adversarial relationship with North Korea. So maybe there's churches or dioceses in Africa or in Latin America where they can have some kind of productive dialogue, because I think it would be more difficult for the regime to accept engagement with with Americans or with South Koreans. I know it's happened before. There is certainly engagement, but a lot of it is restricted. The ability to have those sorts of engagements have always been limited because of concerns from the North Korea side about too much information maybe entering the country.
Thank you very much. I think that's also connected to the need of regional approach. I'd like to highlight that the government of Mongol and the government of Cambodia are trying and potentially will play a very special role in connecting North Korea to other countries. We have those possibilities in Asia region, and that's a different context that we are facing in the US. And I invite the final point from Mr. Yang.
예, 안녕하십니까. 저는 그 민주평통 종교분과위원장 양덕차입니다. 지금 앤드류 박사님이 말씀하신 것에 대해서 제가 좀 첨언해서 좀 말씀을 드리겠습니다. 저는 지난 20여 년 동안
For the last 20 years, I visited North Korea for several times. Together with civil society and also religious group, we had the support and collaboration project. So I had the chance to visit North Korea for like hundreds of times, and during that visit, I could learn a lot about the society and culture of North Korea. And in the last administration, it was more of like government-led efforts to have inter-Korean relationships. So the civil society and religious group was supporting the government to do that. But now, with the Biden administration and also with the Yoon Suk-yeol government, because they are more passive in terms of cooperation between the two Koreas. So maybe we need to expand the scope of religious group and also civil society in this arena so that we can have a breakthrough in the inter-Korean relationship. Maybe we can have direct exchanges or cooperation. Maybe we don't need to go through like the third-party country because we can do it directly. So what's the most important right now is how we can normalize the inter-Korean relationship. And now we are all the way here in the United States because in this religious horizon, especially the Catholic Church, we want to know what kind of role we can play in this aspect. So under that context, like the Jesus Christ taught us with love, maybe we need to have that perspective towards North Korea. But what's the biggest obstacle actually now is actually the U.S. sanction against North Korea. For example, when we visit North Korea, the UN troop comes out and do inspection. Then our laptops, for example, cameras, even those items that really need for work, they think that these are sanctioned, so we cannot bring those items to North. And also, when the religious group or civic groups try to support North Korea with flour or rice, they want us to carry them. We need some vehicles to carry that, but the vehicles cannot enter the border because it's sanctioned items. So we need to carry them. So we need to park the cars there and we need to carry them by ourselves. So we used a ship without engine from Incheon to carry that to North Korea. That's one of the aspects or reality of the U.S. sanctions against North Korea.
Thank you very much.
That's it. Thank you. 감사합니다.
Also highlighted, yes, that also highlighted the huge difficulty we are facing from inside South Korea when we try to develop humanitarian and other cooperation with North Korean partners. It symbolizes the tension between domestic efforts and international conditions again. Thank you very much. And finally, from the floor, I would like to invite former Prime Minister. Is that the English title, right? Prime Minister 맞죠? 네, 네. Former Prime Minister Lee Na-kyun, please.
예, 제가 학생 신분이어서
So now I'm a student here, so I was refraining from speaking, but okay, so I'm going to make some remarks. I think most of the points are covered. I think the big title of this conference is Breaking the Impasse. That was the main title. But I have a little complaint about as to whether if this was really befitting the title. So the United States have this hostile policy toward North Korea for 70 years, where recently, except for some time during the Trump administration, it has been all like containment, isolation, lockdown. That was the key U.S. policy toward North Korea. And the goal of those policies is to induce them to denuclearize or come to conversation table. However, if you look at what happened actually, it was the opposite. Economic sanction continued. So we're giving pain to North Korea so that they can come back to the negotiation table. So did they come back? It rather targeted the people who are the weakest in North Korea. That containment, sanction, isolation, the result of that was more reliance on China and also invisible support from China and also reinforced nuclear forces and missile provocation. So this is not really the result that the U.S. policy expected. It was the opposite. If that's the impasse that we are facing right now, maybe we need to think about a new pathway. As much as they are isolated, the U.S. wants them to raise their two hands and come to the table. However, they are relying more on China. They are not coming back. So now the Korean Peninsula is at the forefront of the new Cold War. Is it what the U.S. wants? If there is this reverse effect from that policies, maybe it's time to have a new policy. Maybe getting terminating their isolation. Maybe that's where we can have the breakthrough. I don't have expertise on this, but I think if you look at the U.S. history after Second World War, sometimes there were like successes, sometimes were devastating failure. And those failures happened when the U.S. was assessed and rigid. Vietnam War, Afghanistan, Iran, Iraq. It all failed. When they were successful, if you think about it, when the United States was more realistic, getting out of the ideological framework, President Truman supported Germany and Japan, which were enemies during the Second World War. President Nixon, when there was this conflict between China and Russia, approached China and normalized the relationship. President Clinton normalized the relationship with Vietnam. So now Vietnam is pro-US. President Obama with Cuba. And nuclear negotiation with Iran. So this kind of realistic policies have been successful if you look at the history. If you look at Cuba, Russia, Iran, why can you have conversation with North Korea. Why? I want some honest answers to that. There has been several opportunities, especially for the Father Bush administration. If you look at that, there was this détente, successful, in 1990. In South Korea had relationship with Russia and Soviet Union, and then China. At that time, they said we will have this relationship with China and Russia, so it will not oppose North Korea to have relationship with these other countries. If North Korea took that chance, maybe the situation is different right now. I think, although late, I think if we can have the American flag in North Korea, and if we can have the Democratic DPRK's flag flying in Washington D.C., maybe the situation is different. I was looking for answers to that, but I haven't. Thank you.
At the last moment, we face the grandest question. I think that will be our starting point for the next conference. Now, may I ask Bishop Kim Joo-young to close the session with your own reflections of the two-day conference, please.
예, 좋은 하루 보내셨습니까? 예, 저도 우리 주교님들과 아까 우리
I also, together with
교수님이 얘기하신 대로
the bishops and also as Professor Love said,
최대한 노력으로 미국 주교님들과 함께
we visited State Department and also the Congress together with the bishops from the American side. And we had a lot of conversation. First of all,
우리 신부님께 들어보니까 오늘 이렇게 강의해 주셨던 분들의
looks like it seems like the presentations were great.
좋은 시간 보내셨다고.
And I heard that you had very good time.
저희가 다시 들을 수 있는 기회는 없는지 모르겠습니다.
I hope we can have another chance because we missed them.
오늘 전 총리께서 말씀하신
like the former Prime Minister just mentioned, we also had the same message to them.
이야기 나누었던 것 같습니다.
Well, so far, more than 70 years, this relationship was not resolved through policies or others. So maybe it's time for us to think about new ways to resolve this. Not just us, but the U.S. government as well. So the U.S. government has regarded North Korea as an enemy, and has been hostile to North Korea. But if it didn't work, maybe we can shift the paradigm to think North Korea as a friend, so that North Korea can be in a situation not like giving up, but not using nuclear weapons. I'm not an expert on politics, but I understand there was this sunshine policy in the former government. If you look at think of the reason why we called it sunshine policies, like through sunshine they were trying to let North Korea take off its coat. So the humanitarian causes and also the universal fraternity that's mentioned by Pope Francis, we're trying to convey that message to the U.S. politicians, hoping that they can have this new attitude toward North Korea. That's what we did today. As the former Prime Minister just mentioned, when you asked that question, I also want to know the answer. Maybe it is because the United States have no choice but to recognize the nuclear status of North Korea. But I heard that it also has this implication to the global non-proliferation, where other countries may want to develop nuclear weapons as well. Because there are these three countries that are not under NPT. If U.S. is recognizing these countries as nuclear states, but maybe U.S. can put North Korea next to them and make North Korea its friend. In that case, maybe we can have more flexible approach. Not just the United States, just but as a strong country or powerful country of the world. At the Congress, because the legislation for peace in the Korean Peninsula was proposed, so that's why we went there to meet the lawmaker. But looks like it's not jointly proposed, so maybe practically it's not going to be effective. But we were, still grateful that they were paying attention to this issue, and also we delivered our messages as well. Well, now we are divided and we're confronting each other. However, I think we need to consider the crisis of the humanity. If we think of that, then we cannot have enemy. We should be together. Then what will be such issues? We have this issue of climate or environment, which is building consensus across the globe. So maybe through this channel, maybe we can have conversation with North Korea, for example. So to sum up, well, yesterday, today, for the last 2 days, I couldn't really participate today. However, we listened to the ideas and insights of many scholars, and also we listened to all those proposals. We are grateful. We came all this long way, and thank you for all this hospitality from the bishops as well as the scholars who are here in the United States. Thank you so much. I think all the small efforts, if we continue and spread that, there is this proverb in Latin where it says that the grassroots is needed, not just the leader. If the grassroots is changed, the leaders will not have any choice but to follow them. As such, if such messages are spread among the public, and if they are changed, I think we can make some progress. So this conference is part of such effort. And as we have the 7th and 8th and 9th conferences for this Voice for Peace, for those who are the poorest, who are the most marginalized, I think we need to continue that. And as faithful people, we need to make efforts to achieve peace in the world. Thank you again for your great presentation, ideas, sharing them. And I also, for the last 2 days, we were here all together with all of our bishops. I hope the seeds that we have today will bloom later in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Bishop Kim. I think this concludes our long session. Can you all congratulate ourselves and each other for having wonderful dialogue for 90 minutes? Thank you very much. I was told that the next step is a photo session. Who is leading the photo session?